Stray dog drops bloody Mitten. What he revealed left them shaken. The sky over Hollow Ridge was pale gray, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or snow. Inside the ranger station, Silas Wren poured himself a mug of coffee. It tasted like burnt dirt, but he drank it anyway. Outside, the fog was thick, clinging to the tall trees like a secret. The forest had been quiet for years. Too quiet, some people said. Silas was used to the silence. He had worked in these woods for most of his life. He liked the routine, the radio check-ins, the paperwork, the slow days. Nothing surprising ever happened anymore. That was how he liked it. Then, just before sunrise, something scratched at the station door. At first, it was soft, barely noticeable. Then it got louder. A low whine followed. Silas stood up, alert. Maybe it was a coyote or a raccoon. But something about the sound was different, desperate, not wild. He opened the door. A German shepherd stood there shaking. Its coat was matted and dirty, with patches of fur missing. One of its front paws bled with every step, leaving small red stains on the wooden porch. But what stopped Silas cold wasn't the dog's condition. It was what the dog was carrying. In its jaws was a child's mitten with faded snowflakes on the back. The fabric was soaked in blood. The mitten string had been wrapped around the dog's snout, like someone had tied it there on purpose. A message. The dog dropped the mitten at Silas's boots and barked. Just once. Sharp and urgent. Silas stared at the dog, stunned. "What the hell?" he muttered. Behind him, the door creaked open. Ivy Delane stepped out, yawning and clutching a thermos. "Everything okay?" she asked. Silas nodded toward the dog. Ivy's eyes widened. "Where did he come from?" "I don't know," Silas said, "but he brought this." She picked up the mitten carefully. Her medic training kicked in. "That's fresh blood," she said. "Maybe less than a few hours old." The dog stared at her, its brown eyes full of something more than pain. Something like urgency, like memories. "We have to follow him," Ivy said. Silas frowned. "Follow a stray into the woods? That's not protocol." "Forget protocol," Ivy said. "That mitten came from a child. This dog's trying to tell us something." The dog turned and limped toward the tree line, then paused and looked back at them. It didn't bark again. It didn't need to. Silas grabbed his coat and radio. "We'll take the old trail truck, but if we lose signal out there, we're on our own." Ivy nodded. "I'm not letting him go alone." The dog jumped into the truck's passenger seat without being told. It sat up straight, staring through the windshield like it knew exactly where to go. Silas glanced at Ivy. "Well, looks like we've got a guide." They drove for 10 minutes through the winding forest roads. Fog pressed against the windows like cold hands. The dog didn't move, not even when they hit bumps in the road. Eventually, the dog barked once and scratched the door. Silas stopped the truck. "This is Old Pine Cutoff," he said. "No one's used this trail since the Hollow Fire." Ivy stepped out first. "Then that's where we start." The forest here looked burned and haunted. Blackened trees reached out like broken arms. The ground was damp and covered in moss. The dog leapt from the truck and took off down a narrow path, its limp slowing it down, but only slightly. They followed. The trail was barely there. Just small footprints in the dirt, a few snapped branches, and drops of blood. Ivy scanned the ground as she walked. "She's small," she said quietly. "Whoever she is, maybe 6 or 7. Silas didn't answer. His hand rested on the radio clipped to his belt, but it only gave back static. "No signal," he said. "We're blind." "We've got him," Ivy said, motioning to the dog. The trail grew steeper. At one point, the dog stopped. Ivy knelt down beside him and saw something caught in a low branch, a piece of pink fabric. She held it up. A hoodie, kid-sized, still damp. Silas looked uneasy. "This is bad." The dog sniffed the air, then took off again, faster now. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just kept moving. After another 20 minutes of climbing over roots and dodging low branches, they reached a clearing. In the center was a shallow pit covered in branches and leaves. The dog ran straight to it and began to dig. Silas stepped forward and pulled back the debris. He froze. A small backpack lay in the dirt, stained and torn. Next to it was a boot. A child's boot missing its laces. Blood on the heel. Then something moved. A soft groan. A hand reached out from the dirt. "She's alive!" Ivy shouted, dropping to her knees. They cleared the rest of the cover. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, lay curled in the dirt, shaking. Her lips were cracked, her eyes barely open. Ivy wrapped her in her jacket. "It's okay. You're safe. Can you hear me?" The girl whispered one word. "Help." Silas tried the radio again. Still static. But this time, he climbed a nearby stump, lifted the receiver high, and got a faint connection. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Wren. We have a female child, approximate age, 8, found unconscious with injuries. Require immediate medical response." The dog sat quietly beside the girl, its tail tapping the earth. His eyes didn't look wild anymore. They looked tired, like he had finally completed a mission he had been trying to finish for a long time. Ivy looked at the dog and whispered, "You're not just a stray, are you?" The dog laid his head gently beside the girl and let out a soft sigh. Not from pain, but from peace. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. The girl was safe now. But then, as the ambulance pulled away, the dog stood up again. He turned back toward the woods. Silas watched him. "He's not done." Ivy tightened her jacket. "Then neither are we." They followed the dog deeper into the trees past the place where the path ended, into the place no one had dared to go for years. The forest was still, silent, but the dog kept going, and they followed.
The forest was colder now. The sun barely reached through the thick trees. Silas walked ahead, his boots crunching leaves. Ivy followed close behind, her hand resting near the first aid pouch on her hip. The German shepherd, Bran, stayed in front of them, limping but fast, his eyes locked on a trail only he could see. None of them spoke much. The silence of the forest pressed on them like a blanket. There were no bird calls, no wind, just the sound of their footsteps and Bran's soft breathing. "How is he still going?" Ivy whispered. Silas shook his head. "Pure will." Bran paused, sniffed the ground and looked back. His eyes met Ivy's, then he turned left, pushing through a patch of dead brush. They followed and found a torn piece of cloth caught in a bramble. Ivy picked it up. It was part of a child's shirt, stained and dusty. Bran whined low in his throat. "He's leading us to someone else," Ivy said. "Or something worse," Silas replied. "That man didn't leave her out here alone." As they moved deeper, the trees grew twisted and charred. Some were black from the fire that had torn through the area years ago. Silas remembered that fire. He had been on duty then, just a rookie. They had lost homes, animals, and people. Some were never found. "I used to patrol this part," Silas muttered, "before the fire." Ivy looked around. "It still smells like smoke." Bran suddenly stopped. He stood very still, then let out a low growl. "What is it?" Ivy asked. Bran stepped forward carefully, then sat down in front of an old tree. Silas stepped closer and noticed a hatch in the dirt, part of a wooden floor, half covered by leaves and ash. Silas knelt down and brushed it clean. A rusted padlock held it shut, but it snapped open with a firm pull. Below the hatch was a crawl space. The smell hit them right away. Old rot, wet wood, and something worse. Silas lowered himself in. Ivy followed, flashlight in hand. Bran waited at the opening, his head low. Inside was a tiny room, empty except for a rotting chair, a torn sleeping bag, and a bucket in the corner. Ivy swept the flashlight across the floor and froze. There were photos tacked to the wall, blurry pictures of children, park trails, and hand-drawn maps. One picture was marked with red ink. Ivy pulled it off the wall. "It's this forest," she said. "He was planning this." Silas looked around. This isn't the first time. Then he noticed something sticking out from under the sleeping bag. He lifted it gently. It was a small notebook. Inside were messy writings, names, dates, thoughts scribbled in crooked lines. He kept notes, Silas said, memories of where he took them. One name was written over and over again, Kara. Silas felt his stomach drop. Kara was the name of a girl who had gone missing 5 years ago, near this very area. She was never found. Bran growled from above. They climbed out quickly. Bran had started moving again, nose down, tail straight. He was tracking. "This is bigger than we thought," Ivy said. Silas nodded, "and we're the only ones out here." After another half hour of walking, they came to a small wooden structure hidden between the trees. It looked like a hunting shack, old and falling apart. The door was covered in scratches, deep ones, like something had tried to claw its way in or out. Bran stood at the door, quiet. "This place gives me the creeps," Ivy said. "We go together," Silas said. He reached out and pushed the door open. The inside was dark. Ivy flicked on her flashlight. Dust floated through the air like snow. There wasn't much inside, just a metal chair bolted to the floor. Ropes lay coiled nearby, stained dark red. There was a shoe in the middle of the room, small, blue, with a cartoon character on it. It had blood smeared along the side. Ivy picked it up, her hands shaking. Another child, a younger one. Bran let out a sharp bark. He darted out the door. "Wait!" Ivy shouted, running after him. Silas followed, heart pounding. Bran was moving fast now, faster than before, almost like he had forgotten he was hurt. He led them around the shack and deeper into the trees. Vines slapped their legs. Branches tore at their sleeves. The ground was muddy and full of hidden holes. Finally, Bran stopped at a small ridge. Below it was a clearing with signs of life, blankets, an open backpack, an empty juice box. "She was just here," Ivy said. Silas knelt beside the blanket, still warm. Bran sniffed the air again, then bolted toward the ravine nearby. The slope was steep and wet. Ivy tried to follow, but slipped. "Ah!" she shouted, sliding down. Silas lunged for her, but he was too far. Suddenly, Bran appeared, grabbing the sleeve of Ivy's jacket with his teeth. He held her just long enough for her to get her footing. She slid safely to the bottom and collapsed, breathing hard. "You saved me," she said, staring at the dog. Bran gave a soft whine, then turned his head. A low growl rose in his throat. There, in the next clearing, stood a man. He was tall and thin, wearing a grey hoodie. His back was turned, and beside him, tied to a tree, was a little girl. She was barefoot and trembling, her face pale and scared. Silas drew his gun. "Hands up!" The man turned slowly. He held a knife. The little girl cried out. Ivy rushed forward, knife already out, and began cutting the ropes. The man stepped toward her, and Bran exploded forward. The dog slammed into the man, knocking him backward. The knife flew from his hand. Silas rushed in, kicked the knife away, and tackled the man. "Don't move!" Ivy had the girl free now. She held her tightly, whispering soft words. "You're safe," she said. "We've got you." The girl sobbed and clung to her. Bran limped over, blood dripping from his paw again, but he pressed his head against the girl's side. She touched his ears gently. Silas stood over the captured man. His heart was pounding, but his voice was calm. "Who are you?" he asked. The man didn't answer. He just stared into the woods. Bran sat next to the girl, eyes alert, as if guarding her from the world. Ivy looked at him with wonder. He didn't just save her, he remembered. Silas met her eyes. He was never lost. He was waiting. The man's name was Declan Rourke. They found his ID in his back pocket after Silas cuffed him. No wallet, just a laminated Forest Service badge from years ago, expired and stained. He had once worked in these woods. Silas and Ivy tied his hands with rope and called for help again. But they were still deep in the forest and the radio crackled with static. They were on their own for now. Bran sat beside the rescued girl, not moving. She had stopped crying, but her body still shook. Ivy wrapped her in a rescue blanket and held her close. Silas stood guard over Declan, who hadn't spoken a single word. He just stared at the trees like he was waiting for them to speak back. "What's your name?" Silas asked. "Why did you take her?" Declan finally spoke, his voice low and raspy. "They don't belong out there. The world's too loud, too dangerous." Silas frowned. "So you tie up kids in the woods? You think that's safer?" Declan didn't blink. "I kept her quiet. I kept her hidden. It's better this way." Ivy walked over, angry now. "You hurt her. She's scared. And she's not the first, is she?" Declan didn't answer. They waited for a long time in silence. Bran stood guard, never leaving the girl's side. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "He said someone would come for me, that the dog remembered." Silas and Ivy froze. "What did you say?" Ivy asked gently. The girl nodded. "He said the dog knew, that he always came back to this place." Silas turned to Declan. "You knew the dog?" Declan's eyes shifted, but he didn't speak. They searched Declan's backpack. Inside was another map, hand-drawn. It marked several places in the woods. One of them was circled in red. "This one's near the old fire tower," Silas said. "We're not far." "I'll stay with the girl," Ivy said. "No," Silas said. "We stick together." Bran stood up. Though he was bleeding, he still walked forward toward the path marked on the map. They tied Declan's hands to a tree with double knots. "We'll be back," Silas warned. "And if you try to run, the dog will find you." Declan said nothing. The hike was short but steep. The fog grew thicker as they climbed. Branches scratched their arms and the air smelled like old smoke. Then they saw it, the fire tower. It stood tall but weak, half its boards rotting. At the base was a small cabin, once used as a ranger post. The door was closed, but Bran walked straight to it and sat down. He didn't bark, he just stared at it. Silas reached out and pushed the door open. It creaked loud, like it hadn't moved in years. Inside was dark. Ivy clicked on a flashlight. Dust floated through the air. The place was empty, almost. There was a sleeping bag on the floor, and beside it, a collar. Ivy picked it up. "This belonged to Bran," she said. "His name was written here, but it's faded." Silas took it. He wasn't always a stray. Bran stepped forward and sniffed the collar. Then he laid down beside it, quiet and still. Ivy looked around the room. Declan didn't just know this place. He lived here. That's when Silas saw it, carved into the wooden beam near the window. "Kara!" His breath caught. "Kara! She went missing 5 years ago." Bran stood up suddenly. His ears perked. He growled low and deep. Then before anyone could stop him, he ran out the door and around the tower. "Bran!" Ivy shouted, chasing after him. Silas followed close behind. They ducked under branches and jumped over fallen logs. Bran stopped at a small hollow beneath a large pine tree. He began digging frantically. Silas dropped to his knees and helped. Soon they uncovered something wrapped in plastic. Ivy pulled back the layers. Inside was a box, and when she opened it, they all went quiet. Inside were small belongings, a bracelet, a torn notebook, a photo of a girl, Kara, her name written on the back in shaky handwriting. Silas stared. This is where she was buried. They sat in silence. Bran stood over the spot, unmoving. Then, from behind them, a voice called out, "You weren't supposed to find that." They turned. Declan stood at the edge of the clearing, a knife in his hand. He had escaped the ropes. Blood ran down his arm from where the bark had cut him. "You should have just left," he said. No one ever listened before. Bran growled deep and low. Declan raised the knife. "Don't move," Silas yelled, drawing his gun. Declan didn't stop. Bran lunged. He hit Declan hard in the chest, knocking him to the ground. The knife flew from his hand and landed in the dirt. Silas ran forward, kicked it away, and tackled Declan, pinning him down. "You're done," Silas said. Declan didn't fight. He just lay there, staring at the sky. "I didn't kill her," he whispered. "She just stopped breathing. I tried to help, I swear. Silas didn't care. You hid her body. You kept trophies. That's not help. That's hiding." Bran limped back to the plastic box. Kai sat beside it and let out a long, tired breath. Ivy wrapped her arms around him. "You brought us here. You remembered." They called it in again, and this time the radio clicked to life. Dispatch answered. Help was on the way. An hour later, more rangers arrived. Declan was taken into custody. The two girls were carried out safely. They would recover, though it would take time. Bran was quiet the whole way back. Silas rode with him in the back seat, Ivy beside them. She held Bran's paw gently. "You did something no human could," she whispered. Silas looked at the tired German shepherd and nodded. "You brought us home." The next morning, the sky over Hollow Ridge was clear and soft. The fog had finally lifted. The forest looked different now, less like a haunted place and more like something that had finally told its story. Bran lay on a thick blanket in the back of the ranger station, his eyes half closed. His paw was wrapped with clean bandages, and a bowl of water sat near his head. He was tired, but his ears still twitched every time someone spoke his name. The little girl they rescued, her name was Lucy Monroe. 8 years old, quiet, with wide brown eyes. She was now safe at the local hospital with her parents. The first thing she asked for after waking up was to see the dog again. Silas had spent the night writing reports, his back aching and eyes burning. The things they had found in the woods, the box, the collar, the notebook, were now in evidence bags. Declan Rourke was in custody, and detectives from the county were already digging near the old fire tower. They had found more than just Kara's belongings. They had found bones. Silas sat outside the station, sipping coffee. Ivy joined him, her coat pulled tight. "You sleep?" she asked. "No," he said. "You?" "A little, not really." They both looked at Bran, who now slept curled up like a guard dog on duty. Ivy reached down and stroked his head. "He won't let anyone else near him except us. He trusts us," Silas said. "He remembers us." A few hours later, a woman arrived. Her name was Rachel Carter. She was Kara's mother. She had come all the way from the coast after hearing what they found. Her hands trembled as she stepped into the station. "Where is he?" she asked. Ivy led her to Bran. The moment Rachel stepped close, Bran opened his eyes. He stared at her, as if trying to place her scent. Then he slowly stood and limped toward her. She dropped to her knees and held out a hand. "You were there, weren't you?" she whispered. Bran pressed his head against her chest. Rachel wrapped her arms around him and cried. Ivy turned away, her eyes wet. Bran didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stayed there, letting her remember. In the days that followed, the town changed. News spread quickly. Local newspapers ran headlines like "Dog leads rangers to missing girls and hidden grave. Stray shepherd uncovers forest's old secrets. The dog who remembered." People began leaving flowers outside the ranger station. Children drew pictures of Bran, taping them to the windows. One little boy left a stuffed animal, a small toy German shepherd with a red bandana. Bran didn't seem to notice the gifts, but he always lay near the front door like a quiet protector. Silas and Ivy stayed by his side. The vet came to check his paw every day. "He's healing," she said, "but he needs time." They gave him a soft bed, his own space, and all the care they could. But every morning, just before sunrise, Bran would rise, walk to the edge of the trees, and sit facing the forest. He would stare into the woods for several minutes, unmoving. It became a routine. One morning, Ivy followed him. She crouched beside him and watched the trees too. "Are you waiting for her?" she asked softly. "For Kara." Bran didn't look at her. He just kept staring. "I think she's resting now," Ivy said. "You can rest too." But Bran didn't move. A week later, Lucy came back with her family. She walked slowly, holding her mother's hand. When Bran saw her, he stood and limped over. Lucy let go of her mom and hugged Bran around the neck. "Hi," she whispered. "Thank you." Bran leaned his head against her gently and wagged his tail once. Lucy handed Ivy a drawing. It showed a girl in a treehouse and a dog standing guard underneath, eyes glowing. "He watches over people," Lucy said, "even when they don't see him." Silas framed the drawing and hung it near the front desk. At a town meeting, the mayor spoke about what had happened. The community wanted to do something special for Bran. Some people suggested giving him a medal. Others wanted to name a park after him. But Silas had another idea. "We should give him a place to stay," he said. "Not a shelter, not a cage, a home." So they turned the empty ranger office into Bran's room. A big dog bed, windows facing the trees, and a wooden sign above the door. "Bran, the one who led us back." Bran didn't seem to care about the sign, but he curled up on the bed every night and looked peaceful. One morning, Ivy found something unusual. Bran wasn't at the door. He wasn't in his bed. Panic rose in her chest. She ran outside. Then she saw him at the edge of the woods, like always. But this time, he wasn't just staring. He was sitting beside a woman. She was young, with a travel backpack and tears on her cheeks. She looked lost, her hands shaking. Ivy walked over carefully. "Are you okay?" she asked. The woman looked up. I didn't know where else to go. I heard about the dog. I used to come here with my sister before she disappeared." Bran had found her sitting alone, and somehow he had known she needed help. Ivy knelt beside them. "You're safe now." Bran looked up at her and wagged his tail. That night, Silas, Ivy, and Bran sat around a small campfire outside the station. The stars were out, and the forest was quiet. Silas held a folded piece of paper in his hands. It was a letter from Kara's mother. "Thank you," it read, "for letting me believe again, for showing me that love doesn't disappear, even when people do. I will never forget what your dog remembered." Ivy looked over at Bran, curled by the fire. "He didn't bark much," she said, "but he spoke louder than anyone." Silas nodded. He remembered for all of us. They sat in silence, letting the warmth settle around them. And somewhere deep in the woods, a wind moved through the trees. Not loud, but just enough. A whisper, a memory.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Love Tales of Tales, for long, heartwarming pets and animals, love stories that stay with you long after they end.